As a software developer, the short answer is the code is proprietary and not accessible to the general public. So we can't simply look at it and determine what it does. When code is released to the public, it becomes very hard to take the compiled version and understand what it does. Especially when the creators do everything they can to stop exactly that. It is technically possible and it's called reverse engineering, but there is a lot of guesswork and it's extremely time-consuming. Your phone is not spying you. What you are experiencing is big data. In the past, the data was stored in classic databases, SQL or NoSQL. Then we found out that we can ingest massive amounts of data far beyond what the classic model can support. This data might be too large to handle, too messy, or even cannot have any structure at all. But with modern tech we can sort this out and transform it into useful data. There was someone who posted a very lengthy takedown of TikTok a few years back on Reddit, and it seemed most just didn't care. This was before US government even threatened it. Spoiler: TikTok is horrible for your privacy. The thought I had, which I by no means know if it's even possible, was could they instead use voice recognition rather than fully recording you? Voice recog on phrases. App hears it, which then sends a notification back to home base. Imagine that would not look any different from the typical data transmission you would see. Which in turn means you'd have no way of knowing. Also, algorithms are insanely smart and people are largely naive to what they do and how they function. Instead of hearing it as algorithm, you should instead hear it as psychological profile. All that data that's been collected essentially creates an image of you. And since all companies share that data, they all know you on a far deeper level than you can possibly realize. Can I check Wi-Fi traffic on Android phone? There's a asterisk lot of lines. It's mostly compiled machine code, very hard to read. And some code is sent to the phone via the internet, so even if you take apart the entire app, you can't be 100% sure you found everything. There could potentially be some hidden feature that can be used to push additional code. And that additional code could contain the nefarious functionality. And that code could only be pushed to a subset of phones that doesn't include the lab devices. For example, advanced malware authors sometimes only push the main part of the malware after some time, and/or after checking that the phone has enough traces of actual usage to be unlikely to be a lab device. But most of all, it's impossible to prove a negative. If someone found actual evidence of spying, they could most likely capture reasonably convincing evidence that it is happening in the form of the code doing the spying. But the fact that nobody has found it yet is not proof that it doesn't exist. People might just not have looked hard enough in the right places, or might have missed something. The only way to prove that would be to analyze everything in depth, which is simply infeasible given how much code exists in each phone. It's simple. Get a new phone, sit in a quiet room, talk about X non-stop, saying you want to buy it, own it, find it on sale, whatever. Then, browse the internet for anything that is entirely unrelated to X. See ads of X. X being some product or anything. It doesn't need to be proven. It is in the terms of service. It isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a contract people signed. Normal people already know they're not spying on what we're saying, but other people either refuse to believe that or just love conspiracy theories. Where would they store all that data? How would they transmit it? How would they be able to differentiate between the phone's owner talking and other people, and even people on TV? They wouldn't even understand any of it that's not spoken extremely clearly without any accent or dialect. Not too fast or too slow. Not mumbled. No background noises. It's just not realistic. Business with this data, not only in advertising, if done correctly and with awesome data scientists, can predict outcomes. Because when you download an app, you don't download the source code. Unless open source, there is no way to just look at the real code to figure such things out. There are decompilers to get some code out of the files you download, but they aren't really readable. And it's nearly impossible to be confident about what the code is supposed to do if you just have the decompiled code. What did you hear about Cox Media Group? I'm curious. Shocked face. It has been conclusively proved that the main apps aren't spying on you. The question is, why do people still believe after it's been conclusively proved not to? This is a sociological question, not a technical one. It's because people love conspiracy theories. My understanding is not so much that we don't know they are doing it. They admit they have the mic running all the time. How else does "Hello Google" or "Alexa" work? The issue is what they do with it. They claim they only use that data, audio stream for certain purposes listed in the terms of service. But do they really? Do you trust them? As for detecting the data collection, you can run a network sniffer if you are running on Wi-Fi that you have admin rights to. Lol. You want the explain like I'm 5 answer? Watch the eSurance commercial. https://www.youtube.com/watch v=aq_1l316 At this point your profile is matched with people similar to you. Tastes, interests, geography, age bracket, etc. We are not unique as you might think. With enough data, and without spying, a business can accurately predict your intents. Greater than asterisk, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. 1. You don't have access to the source code. 2. If you did have access to the source code, you don't know it's running on the phone. 3. You cannot retrieve the source code from the binary code, which is what's running on the phone, i.e., the .epa file. In other words, this seemingly simple assertion, greater than asterisk, look at its code with Xcode, is straight nonsense. You cannot just look at its code with Xcode, because the code you're interested in is source code, and not the compiled binary code. It's like a paragraph about studying the sun, and then suddenly finding a line that says, just land a probe on its surface, and dig down to the core. It's ridiculous. What does that mean, from a cooking analogy? 1. You don't know the secret recipe. 2. If you did have the recipe, you'd have no way to verify those ingredients and process were used to make the cake in front of you. 3. You cannot reverse engineer the recipe, process and ingredients from the baked cake. Well, cooks can do that for something as basic as a cake, but that's just a few dozen ingredients and steps. Source code can have tens to hundreds of thousands of lines of code. The ingredients and process. It's not conspiracy theories, or hypotheses, or mystical. And, indeed, it is science. Science you don't understand. You can ask about something you don't understand. Or you can drop your own nonsense conspiracy theories about, it's science so of course we can know. Why doesn't anyone know? You can't do both. I mean, you can. But then you sound ridiculous. I don't remember what, but me and my friend were talking about something. The next thing I saw when I opened the browser was that item ads. In Quebec, there was a TV show where they put a bunch of smartphone on a tray and asked the owners to start saying all kinds of variation of, it would be so nice to have a coffee machine. If you play video games, chances are some of your friends also play video games and have very similar interests to you. That's the gist of it. The next day an FBA lot of them for publicity for Code machines. Facebook 100% listens on the microphone on your phone and possibly your phone calls, along with its other apps too. WhatsApp and Messenger. I was talking to someone I know about prosthetic eyes and prosthetic fingers. Next time I go onto Facebook on my PC, I get an advert for both these items that is beyond chance. I disabled the microphone on all these apps and no longer get such target ads. This is glossing over a lot of details. The code that runs on your phone is different from what is written. Devs write in what's called a programming language. Python, C, C#, etc. This is code that is human-friendly and readable, but the computer sucks at running it because it has to translate it on the fly to a language that works better for it. So what we do to make it perform better on the machine? We compile the code, which puts it into a neat package for shipping it, delivering the code, and translates it to a language the computer can read really fast because it doesn't have to translate it on the fly. This language can be referred to as machine code. Machine code is not human readable. You ever open a file and get a bunch of random symbols and gibberish that doesn't make sense? To the machine it makes sense since it's the machine's native language. So the task then, in order to make it human readable, you have to decompile, translate the code. That's really hard to do because you don't have the details on how to reverse the language. Only the developers do. There are apps, programs out there that can do it to a degree of success. But the more complex, complicated, custom, bigger the code is, the less success it will have in giving you the uncompiled copy. It's like trying to unbake a cake. Having the executable file is not the same thing as having the code. .x, .epa, .apk, etc. files are compiled code. A compiler has taken high-level human-readable code, Swift, Java, Kotlin, whatever, and processes it down to machine language instructions. Often, these instructions are very much not really readable, nor can they be decompiled effectively. Reverse engineering code from a source is a thing, but it's extremely difficult and time-consuming, and more often than not isn't actually a matter of decompiling but rather writing new code that replicates results and reading raw memory to try to determine what the original code was doing to try to reproduce the same effect. Even if you did have the original code, such as from an open source project, that doesn't necessarily make finding things easy. There are many ways to obfuscate code, making it extremely difficult to determine what code does or how it does it. At that point, you are just being served statistically the most probable ads you might buy. This tech is so good at what it does that you might be talking about something in mere minutes or seconds after you will be served an ad about the topic. You feel like you are being actively spying, or if you know how this works, it might feel a bit like seeing the future. Whenever listening to us comes up, I always send friends the story below, which I copied from some guy's X account last year. They don't need to listen to us. We've already given them everything they need. Big data FTW. Greater than I'm back from a week at my mom's house and now I'm getting ads for her toothpaste brand. The brand I've been putting in my mouth for a week. We never talked about this brand or Googled it or anything like that. As a privacy tech worker, let me explain why this is happening. Greater than first of all, your social media apps are not listening to you. This is a conspiracy theory. It's been debunked over and over again. But frankly, they don't need to, because everything else you give them unthinkingly is way cheaper and way more powerful. Greater than your apps collect a ton of data from your phone, your unique device ID, your location, your demographics. Greater than data aggregators pay to pull in data from everywhere. When I use my discount card at the grocery store, every purchase? That's a dataset for sale. Greater than they can match my Harris Teeter purchases to my Twitter account because I gave both those companies my email address and phone number, and I agreed to all that data sharing when I accepted those terms of service and the privacy policy. Greater than if my phone is regularly in the same GPS location as another phone. They take note of that. They start reconstructing the web of people I'm in regular contact with. Greater than the advertisers can cross-reference my interests and browsing history and purchase history to those around me. It starts showing me different ads based on the people around me. Greater than it will serve me ads for things I don't want. But it knows someone I'm in regular contact with might want. Greater than to subliminally get me to start a conversation about, I don't know, fucking toothpaste. Greater than it never needed to listen to me for this. It's just comparing aggregated metadata. Greater than the other thing is, this is just out there in the open. Tons of people report on this. It's just, nobody cares. We have decided our privacy just isn't worth it. It's a losing battle. We've already given away too much of ourselves. Greater than we spotted a senior official at the Department of Defense walking through the Women's March. His wife was also on the mall that day. Something we discovered after tracking him to his home in Virginia. Greater than so. They know my mom's toothpaste. They know I was at my mom's. They know my Twitter. Now I get Twitter ads for mom's toothpaste. Greater than your data isn't just about you. It's about how it can be used against every person you know. And people you don't. To shape behavior unconsciously. Greater than Apple's latest updates let you block apps tracking and Facebook is mad. They're begging you to just press accept and go back to business as usual. Greater than block the fuck out of every app's ads. It's not just about you. Your data reshapes the internet. Okay, it's been many years, decades, since I did any assembly programming. But if you know the hardware architecture on which the code is running, there are definitely tools in the wild that will take a binary executable and make it somewhat less tedious to read. It won't be any of the new fancy languages, but it will be readable. I think the operative word here is tedious. I certainly don't have the patience to trace through all those MOVs and CMPs and JMPs. In Formula 1, they had to ban custom software solutions because it was impossible to monitor what the code would do. And Formula 1 involves a lot of money and only 10 teams. If the code is not open source, you have no idea what it is doing. Both iOS and Android explicitly specify if an app has recording permissions. So if Meta is spying on you without that permission, Apple would need to provide them a backdoor. But if you know the bad blood between Meta and Apple, you would know that Apple will be the first to rat Meta out. And even if they don't, it's not worth the risk for Apple to do such a thing. Also, the data and battery usage from such constant surveillance would be pretty noticeable. Coding is science, but you're vastly underrating how deep the science can go. I implore you to demonstrate this theory, even on a 10-year-old device. Return your results after your years of training and experience, and then comment on how it went. The truth is, we are not that complex in the grand scheme of things. We all have hopes, dreams and aspirations. All those can be categorized along with thousands of other people and exploited. Consider as a thought experiment polymorphic code, or code that essentially rewrites the explicit code while retaining the same function on compile. How would you recognize that? What if the code is in a locked environment? What if the language is proprietary? There's a lot of complex stuff going on. The only simple answer is to monitor network usage from your device. Turn it off and see what's going on. Part of it is conditioning. Think about crazy conspiracy theorists in like the 70s. They were terrified of the government wiretapping their phone. Today, it's, hey wiretap, play Despacito. 1. Code and traffic is encrypted. 2. There are multiple ways to arrive at the same result, making it very difficult to prove you took a specified way. Listening, and not others. Data analytics. 3. Traffic often leaves the device and goes to an intermediary distribution point. Building all this is very complex, time-consuming and very expensive, but the main idea is really simple if you think about it. Unless the app is open source, e.g. the source code is published on the internet for you to look at and compile into a runnable program, you aren't going to be able to look at the source code. EPA and APK files don't actually just open up in Xcode or Android Studio. I think that it can be indistinguishable from algorithmic prediction. With the amount of data they have on us and the increasing sophistication of social media targeted advertising, I think it's simply become commonplace to predict when and where you will be talking about X, Y, or Z. Think about it. Your phone knows where you live. It knows where your friends live. It knows what you like and what you're averse to. It knows what time of year, week, and day you are likely to be conversing with others and what topics you are likely discussing. The fact that you talk to your fitness-loving friend about going back to the gym on Saturday afternoon, then get a gym membership ad the next time you open your phone isn't because it's listening to you. Your behavior and thought patterns are just simple and predictable with the quantity of data they have filtered through these algorithms. Not to say your phone is never listening to you. In fact, it's intermittently recording you and sending that data back to monitor performance of Siri and other voice controls. I'm just arguing that, when it comes to advertising, they don't need to in order to know what you're saying and when you're saying it. It's far from 100% accurate 100% of the time. But it only has to be 100% accurate 10% of the time for it to feel like it's literally listening to you. No one can afford to send hours of audio to a server for it to be turned into usable data so they can wade through hours of useless text about who's going to prom or whether the chicken is fully cooked just to sell you a bag of potato chips. It's just not economically viable. Because the government doesn't mandate privacy from smartphone spying and force apps to prove they don't spy. Pretty much every single app you download and use specifically tells you that they record everything you input or do while the app is running. Cookies that record your browsing habits and ID through different sites are ancient technology at this point. Your phone has vocal recognition software and tracks your location basically at all times. Most of these things you agree to when you install these apps. Whether you realized it or not, it's not even really a secret anymore. Basically, every piece of software is taking and recording as much data as it possibly can. There are also so many other ways of obtaining information to serve ads at you that people don't think of. People you associate with who have Googled certain terms can result in you receiving ads for those things. You never know that they did that. And you see the ads. And you think, they must have been listening. No. They just have thousands of ways into your head and into your life that you just aren't thinking of. I've never been particularly convinced that there's 24/7 audio snooping going on a large scale. It's just far too much data, with far too much garbage to filter out. Also, it would be very obvious to anyone who likes to watch their own network traffic. Source: I work in this field. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if they use audio around the wake words to contribute to ads and privacy invasion. Absolutely. But 24/7 listening? I don't buy it. A lot of this is because of anonymous location tracking. The company can tell that a device was at, for example, a Ford dealership. The company will then serve ads to you from whoever wants to pay the most to get ads in front of someone who was just at a Ford dealership. Now let's say you also visit some friends. The company can tell that your device was next to a device that was at a guitar store. For example, they make a guess that you talked about guitars with the person carrying that device. So they serve you ads from whoever wants to pay to get ads in front of someone who might have been talking to someone about guitars. They can determine a lot about what you've been talking about without ever hearing it. All you have to audit is the phone's OS to ensure there's no bypass for the mic indicator. iOS, macOS, etc. have already been validated. You don't need to audit individual apps because the OS will tell you when they are using input devices. IRC. If you submit your app to the iOS App Store, they check the libraries it uses and the resources it accesses before allowing it on the platform. I don't think they have access to the source code. Google supposedly does the same but is less stringent. Also, having worked with coders over the years, sometimes even they don't know exactly how the code works. I don't recall what game it was, but the game would not run without a random.jpg file. I'd have to find a source for it. In short, code is like magic, and it doesn't always make sense. This isn't really a smartphone-specific problem. It's really just a computer issue. Computers don't speak English. Everything a computer does is ones and zeros. And they really can only do a handful of things, like adding two small numbers together, or moving a number from one spot to another. But they can do those few things very accurately and very fast. So if I can break up a complicated thing into small chunks, each of which is just one of those simple things the computer can do, then I can write a computer program to do it. I mean, I have made several apps for iOS and there is no way to record audio without the user giving my app permission. Also no way to use the microphone without turning on the little indicator light. The problem is, humans aren't really good at remembering the right order of those simple things. Nor are we particularly adept at the ones and zeros language computers love. So we created computer languages to help us. There are lots of different languages, but they all serve to take in human-readable, that part is highly subjective, input, and convert it into lists of those simple tasks the computer can understand. Because these simple tasks are so, well, simple, they end up getting used in a lot of different ways. So much so, that if you're just looking at the list of simple tasks, it can be difficult to figure out what big picture actions in the human-readable programming language are being accomplished. And if you can't figure that out, then you really don't know what the purpose of the program is. Companies rely on this to keep their code secret. The developers definitely used those fancy languages to develop their programs. But then they compile them, which means they convert them into the list of simple tasks. When you buy their program, you just buy the list of simple tasks, which, unless you have the human-readable programming language code, called the source code, you're very unlikely to figure out what exactly it is doing. To be fair, there are performance gains to be had by doing this also. As with just the list of simple tasks, the computer isn't having to spend time translating before it does the job. But if this was the only consideration, then companies could supply both the simple task list for your computer and the source code for you. And in fact, a lot of companies do exactly this. And we call it open source software. Companies that don't do this just release proprietary software, like what's on your cell phones. And it's very difficult to figure out exactly what it is doing. The short answer is Google and Facebook are spying on you, with advertisements and everything else. Now get your tinfoil hats on. They are colliding with the government and therefore will face no consequences. They've already testified that they work with the government. Define spying. Do they use your microphone? No. Does Facebook track 52,000 different data points on and build a hyper-specialized profile on you? Yes. They know who you are physically with and your relationship and will show you ads for products for that person sometimes. Hell, there is the famous case of Target knowing a girl was pregnant before her father did, and Facebook has 100x times more data. They have data on your gender, sexual identity, size of your house, if you've been in lawsuits, what you buy, the websites you visit, and everything you do on them. including what you buy or put in your cart and don't purchase, meta tracking pixel, and so much more. They probably buy the data from your supermarket rewards scheme and know everything you buy there. 2. Location data of everywhere you go. Your income. Who you talk to. Most of these coincidences is just them being very, very good at accumulating huge amounts of data on you and being very, very good at using it to extract relevant advertising to you. It is their core business. You can do tests yourself. Just repeat the same word over and over again and then notice how many advertisements you receive for that thing, or whatever it might be. Same thing but more. All the stuff you see if maybe possibly when the camera is turned on for whatever purpose you are using it for, but never randomly without your permission. I would have thought that the microphone indicator on the iPhone would come up if an app accesses the mic to listen to people. Plus, it's even more unlikely that an app would be granted that privilege without the user literally granting the app access on iOS. When I bought my own modems and used DDDRT to run my own modems, one thing I saw and tracked down, in my copious free time, of course, where I could recognize most web calls. The ones I didn't, I was able to find out what created the web stream and locked it down. It's been about 8 to 9 years since I did that, but I'm sure if I did it now, I'd still recognize what is legit, like my WoW and MUD streams. And what's a webcam broadcasting to my advertisers? Why you all talking in vague terms? Question mark. Google account greater than activity controls greater than include voice and audio activity, uncheck box. Clicking lean more will give you this. Activity controls. The data saved in your account helps give you more personalized experiences across all Google services. Choose which settings will save data in your Google account. Safer with Google. You control what data gets saved to your account. I can look at all the traffic leaving my phone over my Wi-Fi network. While that doesn't necessarily tell me what the contents of the traffic is, I can see what sites it is sending data to. Haven't found anything spying that I didn't already know was spying, especially TVs. Yet, the whole logistics of uploading audio recorded without knowledge and processing that data with no guarantee there was anything useful said would be pointless. Literally, it's just cookies tracking your data and the people around you to know what's going on in your life. Literally, the apps have access to my Wi-Fi network and my wife's Wi-Fi network and knows we live together, so when something affects her or she Googles something, I might be interested in that thing. 2. It goes way more in depth than that. Google shadow profiles and look into it further. Apps are not using your mic, camera on iOS without you knowing. It used to be easy for an app to get away with this. But modern phones default permissions for recording devices, mic or cam, to off for each app. They also display a green dot on screen when any such device is active. These are not something an app can override. So, the way an app spies on you is by convincing you to allow the necessary permissions and hoping you won't notice the dot when it's doing something it shouldn't. E.g., phone thinks is in your pocket. Make sure you have a modern iPhone or Android. Don't allow permissions where they're not needed. Uninstall apps you don't use. Don't sideload apps unless you really know what you are doing. And pay attention to the green dot. A good practice is to deny all permissions up front, and then as an app needs one it will request permission again and you can decide if that makes sense. A note-taking app requests location permission while it's setting in your pocket. Denied and installed. A stargazing app wants to use the camera while you are aiming your phone at the sky. Allow this time only. It's relatively easy to prove that a smartphone spies on your conversations, if it does. There are traffic logs. There are power consumption patterns. There is reverse engineering. But it's totally impossible to prove that the smartphone doesn't spy on you, because how do you prove an absence of something? Etc. If an app refuses to provide basic functionality without unneeded permissions always enabled, uninstall it. Yes, a phone can be hacked or trojaned, but it's not practical for spyware to waste an NSA level 0-day exploit to collect marketing data. They'd just sell it to a state-level actor for a fortune instead. You can use an app like AdGuard and see exactly what telemetry, tracking, app measurement URL every app is connecting to. Advertisers place trackers throughout the entire web to spy on your browsing history. Google does this with Chrome, too. It doesn't even matter what computer you're using. They can target based on IP addresses or similar identification. Use an ad blocker. Be aggressive about installing one everywhere you can. And stop using Google Chrome. It's not so impossible to disprove though. Even if you can't see the code, run a meaningful debugger against it nor decrypt network traffic. Some phones will indicate mic usage on a hardware level. That is one such check. On a number of systems as well, we can audit requests to access various resources like the mic. Similarly, while we can't be entirely certain about what it's doing 24/7, if they were transcoding audio to text locally, it'd show in detailed device resource usage. And if it were to some external theoretical cloud resource, we'd see some sort of hopefully encrypted network traffic that at least hints towards uploading such. Like apply Occam's razor for a moment. Is it really likely random advertisement firms have figured out ways to bypass hardware safeguards, escape all sorts of resource auditing, found a way to do it without nuking the battery and hide any indicative network traffic? And that if they did this, that they'd really be spending all this effort on ads rather than something more nefarious? It's theoretically possible. It's just about as likely as a 0-day exploit being planted in a charger on a train for some similarly menial goal rather than selectively used spy on a high-profile target like some billionaire or politician before Google, Apple, whoever patches it. This is why we like open source. We can't see any of the proprietary code. We can see every line of code on any open source project. But think about it. There are a lot of talented hackers in the world. They find ways into the most secured and exotic systems. Look, for example, at Gray Key, a dongle that can breach the iPhone's biometric protection. One of the most secure hardware designs in the world. In less than 24 hours. Reverse engineering the store apps like Facebook or TikTok would be a piece of cake for them. And yet the best piece of evidence we have is by weak inference. I talked about the less than thing greater than and now I'm presented with ads about less than thing greater than. As a software engineer, it's just too complicated, a web of dependencies in many, but not all, cases. The hand waving is because in some cases some of it could be used theoretically. But proving it is surprisingly difficult. It's like money laundering. But it's information laundering. To the degree that it's happening, a lot of it is probably by accident. For example, you're chatting with a friend at your house about wanting to buy XYZ. Friend goes to the bathroom and looks up XYZ. They were on your Wi-Fi. So your home IP is now associated with being interested in XYZ. When you start seeing it advertised to you, and you know you never searched for it online but that you were talking to your friend about it, it feels like it was listening in on your conversation. In truth, it wasn't listening in on your conversation, but it really was listening in on the website your friend visited privately from the bathroom when they were at your house. That's the simple case. It gets way more complicated and worse. The ad networks are like the credit bureaus, but decentralized. Each agency has a tiny piece of the puzzle. None of them actually have a clue what's going on. But when they work in tandem, they can even be competitors. Their competition for your eyeballs has created an evolutionary environment where the result most likely to reach you and get clicked on by you is the one that emerges. Simply by virtue of being the most fit to do so. Like going through 20 different sieves. And one result comes out at the end. Whichever sperm is fastest and strongest and still healthy fertilizes the egg. But nobody can really say exactly why that particular one made it. There's a lot of chance involved. 2. I've always found it funny that people are so paranoid over their cell phones, listening, or spying on them when in reality they've literally unknowingly given permission to applications to share data and analytics with third parties in an effort to make the user experience better. It's all written in the terms and conditions of everything they use, but nobody ever reads them. On the whole, it isn't happening. The counter-evidence is an endless string of anecdotes like, I said shoes and they showed me an ad for shoes. I never Googled it. Quote, what I tell people time and time again is that it's much easier for them to use thousands of pieces of metadata to make very good predictions. When ads know where you are, who you're with, who you are, and what you're doing, to the effect of hundreds or thousands of data points. And when that's put into machine learning algorithms with millions of other people's behaviors tracked over years, it's not that surprising that these companies can predict behavior fairly accurately a lot of the time. People aren't as unique as they think. Most of the time ad companies are analyzing more data about you than you could about yourself. In a lot of cases they can probably predict what people might purchase before the people making the purchase can. No expensive audio sifting needed. It's you versus a billion-dollar company that tracks your every move. Of course they can figure out when you need to buy shoes. They don't need to hear you say that to figure it out. There are probably 100,000 people like you making nearly identical shopping decisions. The strongest proof is that it's not worth it. Extracting useful info from raw microphone data is extremely difficult and inefficient. It only makes sense for a state-sponsored intelligence operation working against a high-value target. And they'd have humans reviewing the audio. It's not really that difficult to disprove it. There is no company in the world, not even Google, that can process or manage the utterly vast amount of data that would come in from a 24/7 pipe on every phone. Plus anyone can see that the bandwidth usage stats on their phone is not sufficient to do that. Same with power consumption. It's just that people generally ignore the explanation in favor of their perception. For whatever reason, it's easier to believe that their phone is actively listening to them rather than to believe that they're predictable based on their location and friends and search history, etc. It really isn't hard to disprove. But people want to believe what they want to believe. And on Reddit, there's tons of people who simultaneously think they are experts because they've been playing PC games for a decade, and also love being paranoid and thinking tech companies are literally the devil, completely disregarding whether it would make any sense for a company to spend so much money on collecting data they couldn't legally use anyway. Bypassing the microphone is on indicator is built into Google's Android, because as long as code runs in the private compute core, they don't see the need to enable it. https://security.google.com/2022/12/trust-in-private-compute.html. It's how Pixel phones can do the song recognition thing. What's playing? Without having to enable the microphone. From as far as you can tell. Of course the microphone is enabled for this. But Google says it's done securely. So I guess you just have to trust them on that? This mind-boggling level of just trust us was discussed on Reddit years ago. For instance here, https www.reddit.com/r/google-pixel_6_now_playing_mic_warning_light/iOS sound app dev here. 15 years. I don't know about Android, but on iOS the microphone turning on for any reason causes either the mic icon or the dot in the status bar or the notch to appear. Yeah, maybe an app that is side-loaded could get around this, but nothing from the App Store. You can't prove a negative. So no one will ever be able to definitively say it isn't happening. But circumstantially it is a dumb thing to do. Voice to text. Especially from shitty sources like a phone microphone many feet away from the source. Would be very inaccurate. And very compute intensive. To the point that a lot of phones wouldn't be capable of it. And those that are would turn into little heaters as they ate through the battery in a few minutes. If you want to test this, put the newest, best device you have on dictation mode. Put it in your pocket or on a table, wherever you'd keep it, and have a normal conversation. Then review what it deciphered. Then think about how you'd figure out what to advertise to you based on what you see. Simply put, secretly listening in on your phone conversations to try and figure out what to advertise to you. All while keeping it a big secret is super hard, expensive, and illegal in a lot of places. It's a lot of trouble to go through just to get your hands on ad targeting data that is a lot easier to get through legal means. Plus you would have to keep your employees from spilling the beans. People love to talk shit about ex-employers. Someone would have snitched by now. For example, two friends, Bob and Jane, are talking about buying the new gaming laptop from Acer. Bob goes home and Googles it, looks at the specs, and adds them to his shopping cart. Jane then sees an ad for the exact laptop they were talking about the next day. How did that happen? Well, you already told Facebook that Bob and Jane are friends. Jane tagged Bob in a photo of her fancy latte that she got while they were hanging out and talking about laptops. So FB even knows they were together moments before Bob bought a laptop. From their other social media activity, advertisers know that Bob and Jane like to play video games together. So Bob and Jane are friends. They have the same gaming interests. They just hung out together. And Bob is getting ready to buy a laptop. If I'm Acer, I want to show ads to people that know my customers, that have the same interests with my customers, and that have recently been physically close to my customers. Social proof. Meta has all that data. They will be happy to sell you ad space that Jane and everyone else that Bob has had a conversation about laptops. We'll see. Why would Facebook or any other company face criminal wiretapping charges with an expensive, unreliable technology to secretly violate their customers' trust, when they could just do it out in the open with the data that you willingly hand over? Because it's not. Your phone isn't spying on you. It's against their own terms and would be a major privacy violation. Google has all sorts of metrics and with collecting geographic data to form your ad profile. Facebook counts the seconds you spend looking at an ad. All of this nets you creepily accurate ads. https frontiergroup.org/articles/your-phone-isn't-listening-you-it's-just-tracking-your-dash-every-move/https frontiergroup.org/articles/your-phone-isn't-listening-you-it's-just-tracking-your-every-move/. This talks about how they don't have to listen to us. For the tech companies, they can't afford to pay a human to listen to hours of your ramblings on the off chance that you'll click an ad and earn them 7 cents. Greater than as if coding wasn't science. As if the applications and devices in question aren't open source. It's like that by design. In an ideal world everything would be open source. But that doesn't generate ad revenue or help the government crack down on crime. Whoa. I work part-time for CMG. What happened? I only do peripheral work. Like setting up for live remote events or unplugged concerts. I don't work in the buildings. Edit. Holy crap. I just Googled it. Whoa. And I'm a liberal. They don't know that. I don't tell them. But now I'm kind of freaked out. Even if you could prevent them from spying on you, you still can't. Because your popular friends and family whom you love being around have phones in their pocket. They are recording and taking photos and making posts willingly without your consent and practically sharing your location and identity. The solution to ensuring your own privacy these days is to have no friends and live alone in a cave. TLDR. I work in ads. We aren't listening. We don't need it and can advertise diapers to your dad before you've told him you're pregnant. Voice data would be an impractically large dataset to work through. I work in ads for a FAANG company as a software developer. We do not have your phone listening to conversations, and I'm happy to explain why. First, companies like ours have billions of visits a day. Each user is tracked in a pseudonymized fashion to protect your privacy. For example, I can't see what John Doe looked at. Instead, it would be some UUID, with just the tracking that goes on by recording your clicks, views, etc. We are ingesting petabytes of data every day. These data points are recorded as integers which take up 4 bytes. This data then takes full-time processing and costs millions of dollars a year to utilize. Google says that iPhone records audio at 16-bit, 44.1 kHz float, which apparently works out to 160 kilobytes per second. So a single second of audio recorded by iPhone is the equivalent of about 41,000 clicks, views, etc. on our websites. There are about 1.5 billion iPhone users, and if we say on AVG, you have your phone with you 12 hours a day, that means we would have to record and process 1.5 billion * 12 hours * 3,600 seconds * 160 kilobytes of data per day, which is about 1.06 times 10 to the 19 bytes of data. For context, giga, 10e9, tera, 10e12, peta, 10e15, exa, 10e18, zeta, 10e21. It's way easier to get a signal by watching your browsing history and sharing what you do online via third-party cookies. The entire internet is said to be around 150 zettabytes. And this conservative napkin estimate for the voice data of iPhone users only 16% of all smartphones is about 106 exabytes. This data is far more complex than a simple number and would cost billions to trillions of dollars to parse and decode. Second, we don't need it. We can already tell if you are pregnant before you do based on your viewing, purchase habits. Target new girl was pregnant. https www.forbes.com/sites/cash-hill/22/16/how-target-figured-out-a-teen-girl-was-pregnant- before her father did. On the iPhone, at least on the newer models, the system indicates to you when the microphone and the camera is active. You can keep an eye on this, and if you see activity when you really don't think there should be any, that would be a good indicator. You also typically have to give applications permission to access microphone and camera. I'm not sure about Android. Transparency regulations have been wooed with cheap action over actual transformative and impactful legislation. In other words, they are still catering to big data, the big three, and the lobbyists that throw them a huge fat golden bone to chew on. Your EULA agreements with your smartphone, device operating system, the software installed, AI apps and integrations, their permissions. It all should hint us enough, but who has time for all that? What does that mean for us when each and every element requires access to all the important sensory of what it means to be human? I am sure others have pointed out that you don't need to make an actual recording and handle large, bulky audio files. Variables can be assigned to detected audio that are extremely small and surreptitious, but still explicitly identify keywords useful for direct marketing. In addition, ML can accurately predict interest with very little info. I expect that it's not hard to confirm what might have been discussed without any actual audio input. Best explain like I'm 5 answer I can do is, so you think your smartphone is spying on you? Prove it. Quote, the anecdotes about, I mentioned this and then it popped up, are coincidences amplified by our cognitive biases. We are wired to find connections between random events that seem related. We don't keep track of or talk about or even notice all the things we mention around our phone that don't pop up, because they're super common and not interesting. But we take the 0.1% exception as definitive proof of cause and effect. Upside down face. All code should be open sourced, it's the right of the people. Removed. Not hard to prove. There's multiple markings groups that straight up explain that spoken words around the phone are used in marketing campaigns. If your word matches the demographic, you'll see the ads in your searches. The microphone always has to be on to listen for Hey Google or Hey Siri. It's always listening and sending that info somewhere. All the proof I need is when I verbally told my wife about a brand new fishing reel that was coming out and how I wanted it while both of our phones were on the counter while we ate dinner a few feet away. The next time she opened Instagram after dinner, the first ad that she scrolled by was an ad for the reel. She doesn't fish, has no interest in fishing. We don't really discuss it much since I know she doesn't care. And she'd never had a fishing ad show up on her feed before. Every app and app update that's submitted to an app store is reviewed. So if there was the capability to snoop, then Apple would have to be in on it. If you look at apps like Instagram, they literally tell you they access everything about you that they can. Your search history, browsing history, emails, texts, photos, videos, financial and health information, etc. They already know so much about you and who you're with and what you do. Connections between you and others. If your wife is searching something, they'll know you're both together. On iPhone at least, there's no way they can record your voice without the microphone indicators in the menu bar. You cannot get around that. I think it's difficult to prove because I don't think it's happening. I think we already hand over so much data and information about ourselves that it's pretty easy to guess our intentions. And a lot of the times you'll ignore the 100 other adverts you've been served and only notice the one you've seen that you recently spoke about.